Alrighty. Welcome back, guys. It's another video. My star. My name is whoever the fuck I want to be. Right? Today I decided my name is my star. Tomorrow I might decide my name is something else. You know what I mean? Because I choose how I want to express, what kind of body I want to inhabit. Right? Now, I know this is going to stand out like dog balls, so I might as well address the elephant in the room. Okay, so do not mind that big fat ass stain on the wall back there. That is not dust or powder, or actually it's a form of powder. It is a stain from someone putting up a decoration over here. So yeah, I just want to address that before, because I know a lot of people will probably be watching the video and you won't be able to take your mind off of that, like me, especially just standing here and watching myself on the screen or looking at myself on the screen while I'm filming. It stands out like dog's balls, so might as well address the dog's balls so that we can get that out of the way and maybe it can exit our minds a little bit quicker and easier. And then nobody has to comment on the video like, what the fuck is that thing in the back of your video? Now you know. Now you know. Now you know. Alright, so before I get into this video, I want to give a preface as well, as always. I always like to do a preface, a little preparation to prepare your mind, right? Get into that Taurus energy, get into that practical energy of the earth element, right? And, a little bit telling or not telling, a little bit truthful to the energies that we're experiencing right now, because we are also in Virgo moon and Gemini sun. So we've got double Mercury energy right now going on in the air, in the atmosphere, right? So that means we are going to be, with the Virgo moon, we're going to be reacting and responding to that energy of going back over something, reviewing something, right? Tending to the details of something, because Virgo is all about the details, right? So we're going to be like analyzing or going within, utilizing all that hermit energy with the Virgo and utilizing our worries. Okay, so during this time, a lot of people may be worrying, you may be overthinking, you may be overstressing about things. All right, but it's good to utilize this energy and direct it in the right space, because you can either worry about stuff that you can't change, or you can worry about stuff that is actually going to make a difference in your life. All right, so choose your poison, pick your poison. I choose to worry about things that are going to make a difference, right? So I worry about my creativity, how I'm gonna express my creativity or bring my dreams and will them into reality, right? That's what I choose to worry about. I worry about how I'm going to best correlate my energy and utilize my energy in the best way possible for me to be able to drive my purpose and my passion into the right direction. Okay, so that's how I'm directing my worries right now. And if you're in the negative, or not negative per se, but if you're in the lower octave side of life, or the energies are right now, you may be not in the lower octave side of life, you may be just in the lower octave energies of right now, then you'll be directing a lot of your worries into areas that won't necessarily help you and are more just going to bring you down, and actually may even take you away from your passion and your purpose. All right, so this is why it's important to have a passion and a purpose in the first place, because if you have a purpose, no matter what you go through, whether it's positive or negative, you're always going to be utilizing all of that energy and transmuting it for your purpose. You know what I mean? As opposed to, if you have no purpose, then you're going to be utilizing your negative energy for bullshit, and then you may even utilize your positive energy for bullshit. You know what I mean? But if you have a purpose, you know where to direct that, you know where to channel all of that energy, and this will lead you to be a lot more motivated, passionate, a lot more driven, a lot more even full of vitality. So when I had no purpose, when I lacked purpose, I didn't want to get out of bed. I didn't want to do much. I was lazy. I was looking for an easy way out in life, right? All that kind of shit because I didn't know how to direct my energy. As soon as I gave myself a purpose, because I gave it, I didn't find it. A lot of people may struggle and be like, oh, I don't know what my purpose is. I need to find my purpose. You need to actually create your purpose. You're like, look at life from the realistic perspective, right? If you go out into the world, right, things are not handed to you. A lot of the time you need to work for something, you need to create something. This is beyond the shadow government world. The shadow government world is just a mimicking template of what we already exhibit in life. If you go out in life, you could pick up a stick, right? That stick may not have much value to someone, but as soon as you start to you start to carve down that stick, you start to give it shape and form, right? You put your own energy and your own essence into that stick. And then you might paint it, you might decorate it with feathers and beads and whatever else you feel like would make that stick look nice. Now that stick has value to others. But before it had value to others, you were the one who saw that it had value to yourself. But it wasn't until you put your energy into it, you infused your essence into it, that's when it just started to develop a sense of value to others. And even if you're not physically crafting or changing that stick, you can still mentally change that stick. So let's say you might be able to you might be really good at utilizing your words and utilizing your expression. And you might be able to tell someone and just talk to someone to the point where now they will see that stick as valuable. Where before, they would have just been like, it's just a stick. But as soon as you started to say, oh, well, but look at this, the way that the stick curves over here, right? Look at the way that the stick bends over in this part of the stick, right? Look at the way that the stick points out in the different directions. This is just a little bit of a silly example, but you get the idea. Look at the way the stick points up, look at the shape of the stick. It's nice and round, it's got a good structure to it, and look at the color of the stick. It's not just brown, you know what I mean? It's got light browns, it's got dark browns, it's got all kinds of different browns in there, you know what I mean? All kinds of different shades. And it even has many different lines and shapes. You know what I mean? You'd be able to talk someone into thinking that stick is like gold if you're good enough. You know what I mean? So, like I was saying, you are... Sorry, I'm trying to remember my point at this point because I went so deep into that whole stick analogy. Now I'm like, hold on. Where was I at? So, when it comes to I was talking about Virgo, right? And I was talking about, purpose, having a purpose. Yeah, so, it's the same with a purpose, you know what I mean? If you think that you're just going to get a purpose as opposed to you being the one who's willing to create that purpose for yourself, willing to carve that purpose out for yourself. Because a lot of people will be like, oh, well, my job is my purpose. Okay, but what happens one day if if that job becomes obsolete? You know what I mean? Not saying that it's wrong to have a job as your purpose, but what happens one day if that job ends up becoming obsolete? Maybe we don't need that in the world. You know what I mean? Maybe your job is to do accounting. Maybe in the future, we don't need accountants. You know what I mean? Maybe we have something else that supersedes accountants. You know what I mean? So then what happens if your purpose is obsolete in the grand scheme of things? Do you have the power? Do you have the will to actually push through and create a better purpose? Or maybe if you feel strongly about accounting or whatever it is, maybe you start to will that into reality and make it valuable again, like the stick analogy. You start to talk to people and convince them about how actually you do need accounting. Yeah, it might be obsolete in this area, but look at this area of life now. Look at this area that's completely empty. Now we we need something to replace this energy that's empty over here. And then people will start to be like, oh, actually, this person might be onto something. And then boom, you're the best accountant in the new age, and nobody else can actually talk about accounting like you because you just created a new way to look at accounting, right? So when it comes to you having a purpose, you need to create that. You need to will that into reality. You need to bring that into existence for yourself, all right? You can't just expect it to fall on your lap. So when you're creating a purpose, it's also good to create a purpose that's more broad, that's more expansive, so something that can constantly evolve, something that can constantly change and transform. Because therefore, even when other things change and transform, or even when that purpose may become obsolete, you've still got your purpose is constantly expanding and growing anyway. So it doesn't matter if one thing of it becomes obsolete, because you've got many different ways to go about that purpose. And therefore, you've got a constant source of energy, you've got a constant source of motivation, you've got a constant source of drive now pushing you every single day to get out of bed, to create your dreams, to make it become reality. So it doesn't matter what happens in the external world. Your purpose is just constantly changing, it's constantly evolving, and that's more in line with the truth. That's more in line with the greatest awareness, the most expanded space, right? And that's more, dare I say, godly, or more close to all possibilities, right? Because God is really just a limited way of explaining something that is all possible, that is all encompassing, right? When it comes to God, that's just a minimalistic, limited, entrapped form of what people are trying to explain as all possibilities. So, when it comes to you having this purpose, or you giving yourself this purpose, you are going to be a lot more better off, because now you can, like I said, direct all your worry energy, your Virgo energy, or any other energy that we go through into a more positive and beneficial space for yourself and for others. And we've got the Sun in Gemini too. So what's the Sun in Gemini? That's being mutable and adaptable to your own and other ways of thinking and communicating. Because Gemini is an air sign, thinking and communicating, right? And it's in the Sun. So Sun is all about our actions, how we act, how we go about things, how we push that energy out into the world and into the external. So that's going to be us being mutable and adaptable to our own and other people's ways. And because it's in the moon's in Virgo, it's going to be us worrying about shit, us over-analyzing, or us analyzing, or us going into the details of something in terms of the world that we're in, and then expressing it in a mutable and adaptable way. So an example of this, you could be having a conversation to someone about analyzing about your certain situation. You know what I mean? Because that's that Gemini energy, being mutable and adaptable to your own and others' ideas, and then that Virgo energy, analyzing your situation, going into the details. What are the things we need to take care of? Going back into something, reassessing something. And then, because it's double Mercury, it's all going to be in terms of that mental realm. So big mental energy going on right now, big talkative energy, especially during Gemini season. Everybody wants to talk, everybody wants to blah, 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 blah. You might have even noticed my video is getting longer because my Gemini energy, I'm expressing that Gemini energy more prominently now. Normally I like to keep things short and sweet, especially last time it was Taurus season, right? Everything practical, everything makes sense, right? So I was trying to make sense out of things with my own life and the videos. So I was trying to keep them nice and short and sweet so I could utilize and manage my time more effectively. All right, that's all earth quality. Now it's Gemini season. I'm more into that energy of you know what? I just want to sit here and talk about all of it. I just want to express it. I just want to jump into the different ideas, into the different ways of communicating and thinking about this thing. And then Virgo, you know, jumping into that, reassessing, reanalyzing. But anyways, so yeah, just make sure you're directing your worries and shit into a more beneficial area, and then you'll be a lot more better off during this time. So, this is why it's also good to keep in mind and pay attention to the transits that we're going through. You know, whether it's Virgo, Leo, Sagittarius, whatever the signs are in, we're going to be experiencing that energy. And you may think that you are beyond that or that you're not expressing that, but in some way, shape, or form, it's going to be coming out in your external circumstance, regardless. So when you're aware of that, you can adjust things a lot better, and you can kind of work with the energy, you know, and utilize your energy to the best of your ability and make it a lot more like peachy clean, peachy keen, like beautiful, easy breezy cover girl, you know. So then you can look like things are effortless. You can look like things are a lot more simple, when a lot of people may be expressing an energy that goes against the overall energy that we're experiencing in terms of the as above, aka the astrology. And then you'll be able to be like, oh, well, you know, actually, if you express yourself more in this way, or if you act more in this way, or like, for example, as a Taurus, you know, if we're in Scorpio season, I know during Scorpio season, me acting too much like a Taurus is not going to get me very far. It may get me good some places, especially if we're in Taurus moon, but in the overall sense, I may experience a lot more frustration because I'm trying to push my energy in a space, aka Scorpio, that's a lot more against the grain. So Scorpio is a lot more secretive, you know, Scorpio is a lot more reserved. It goes deep into things, right? It doesn't like to stay surface level. Scorpio likes to go deep into something, whatever it does. It likes to go deep into that. Whether it's emotions, whether it's thoughts, whether it's actions, it likes to deeply do these things. So when, as a Taurus, Tauruses kind of like to stay more on the surface level. They like to keep things a lot more light, you know? They don't like to keep things deep and heavy and dive into something, you know what I mean? Tauruses like to more just kind of stay above the surface. Not to say that Tauruses can't be deep, but that's just their default, how they like to naturally sit, being a Taurus, you know? And then also Tauruses are very, very open, sometimes too open if you're a Taurus. You know, sometimes you may even get told as a Taurus by other people around you to just like keep some things to yourself. Some things are just meant to be kept private. That may have been a Scorpio that actually told you that some things may need to be kept private. Or if they're not a Scorpio, they just play out more of those Scorpio energies of being more secretive, being more behind the scenes, being more deep, being more private, you know. And Tauruses don't really give a shit about none of that stuff a lot of the time. Like maybe later on in your life as a Taurus, you might start to develop more of that energy of being more private. But earlier on in your life, you're more just like, I don't really care about that. I'm just gonna do me. If people care, then people care, you know. As a Taurus, sometimes you like just will say stuff and then people will be like, oh my gosh, like why did you need to share that? That's TMI, you know, or it may not be that specific sentence that I just said, but you get the idea. So, what else? Yeah, that's pretty much all I wanted to talk about with the astrology. I didn't want to make this an astrology video. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the alignments, and then I started to go a little bit more deeper than I initially planned. But yeah, that's why it's good to know the alignments that we're going through right now during this time. Keep you on your toes so you're aware of what's going on around you and aware of why certain energies may be playing out, you know. So keeping in mind, even if you don't get into astrology, just knowing your opposite sign, you know, what is your opposite sign? Knowing what an opposite sign is, you know, all of these things can help you when it's your opposite sign or when you're experiencing your opposite sign in the moon. or even your own sign, so that when it's your sign in the sky, as the moon or the sun or any other planet, you know that you'll experience a lot more of the benefit, and you'll also be able to tell, oh, you know what? That's probably why I'm experiencing a lot of these positive energies during this time, and my manifestations may be seeming stronger than normal, because it is your sign that we are experiencing as above in the atmosphere, in the air around us. Don't mind me yawning, guys. So yeah, and anybody else who may be like, oh, well, astrology's bullshit. It's based off like what the stars. Actually, no, astrology is not based off of the stars. Astrology is based off of the seasons, the seasonal transits. Look up astrology and the seasons. Should be able to find something online about it. It's based on the seasons. So that's why Aries is the first sign. Aries starts in spring. It starts off the spring energy, right? So when we're talking about it being the first sign, that's the reason why. And the last sign is winter, Pisces. That's the end of winter. So that's why astrology is not necessarily based off of the stars. It has nothing to do with the stars, really. The stars is more of an after fact. It's after the fact. Because everybody's always analyzing what's going on around them first, you know, in their environment, in their immediate environment. But yeah, anyways, this video, this topic I wanted to talk about is how the government keeps everyone in their lower animalistic energies. The reason why I even came to the idea of this video was because personally, myself, I've been experiencing, like, let's start a little bit more at the ground basis. So, for years, I've had eating issues, right? I've had eating issues, not in terms of just eating disorder, which was more in the past. I don't really struggle with that anymore. But I used to struggle with an eating disorder. I used to struggle with just getting myself to eat in general, which is also, some people would say, is common amongst people who have ADHD or whatever. So when it comes to, not that I necessarily believe in ADHD in the way that they clinically describe it, but just for context, you know, because I don't really go by clinical shit. I don't really go by like doctor shit or even science shit, because a lot of science stuff I can pretty much explain it in a lot more easier to understand way or overstand way, and a lot more realistic way, where science, a lot of the things they talk about, 5 years later they'll come up with another theory that debunks the theory that they just talked about. So, and that's the basis we need to remember as well. Everybody needs to remember, a lot of science, majority of science is just theory. But a lot of people are kicking science and talking about science as though it's fact. A lot of it is just theory. So we need to remember that when we're like talking about science. Not to debunk science. Science has benefits, science has downfalls too. Everything has benefits and downfalls. We need to know the basis of something. And a lot of the basis of science is theory. So don't ever get it twisted when it comes to science and thinking that it's straight up facts, or that it's like the Bible, where even the Bible is not necessarily like how people try to portray the Bible. Because you'll talk about it, a lot of people will talk about the Bible and they'll talk about it in a metaphorical sense, right? But then they'll also talk about it in a historical sense. So we need to get things straight when we're talking about things. Is it metaphorical or is it historical? You know what I mean? So, you know, it can't be both of them. You have to choose one. And I choose to see it in a metaphorical sense. Look at it from a, like, esoteric sense, rather than looking at it as a history book. So when we look at it a metaphorical way, we know that everything in it is a metaphorical, down to the characters, the characteristics that they display, the energies that they're in. all of it's metaphorical. All right, so same with science, theory. It's a majority of it's theory, and then you get down to the nitty gritty, then they'll start to prove certain theories. But a lot of the time they end up disproving the theories that they already disproved, and then later on in the future they end up coming to another conclusion. So that's why I don't really go by science per se. I just go by what's in life, because that's different, and that's another form of science, but it's more based in fact. It's more based in what we actually see in reality. And if you can't see it on many different levels, as opposed to just one, then it's probably not actually fully true, or it might not be as close to the truth as people portray it. So, back to what I was talking about anyways. When I was talking about me struggling with eating, right? In the past, I struggled a lot with eating and especially digestion. And I've tried many different techniques. I've looked at many different avenues, many different people's perspectives on it, right? Main thing I struggle with is my food doesn't seem to digest properly, right? My body doesn't seem to digest properly. My body digests very, very slowly, right? And one of the only times that I find myself actually being calm in terms of my digestion in my body is when I'm not eating. So that's something I've come to see over time. But earlier on, I used to force myself to eat a lot, and first it started off probably talked about in this and other videos, but first it started off with me just skipping my first meal of the day, because a lot of people will try to emphasize and put emphasis on the first meal of the day is the most important meal of the day. So I used to find myself a lot of the time forcing myself to eat breakfast. Nowadays, I realize that if you have to force yourself to do something, it's probably not necessarily the right thing to do always. Some things it's good to force yourself, especially if you're in a rut and you're trying to get out of it. But in terms of eating, if my body is not hungry, if my body is not accepting it, then why would I sit there and force my body to do something that it's not necessarily wanting to do? Then over time, I started to notice even more. My body's struggling to digest a lot of the foods that I would eat. So I started to look at other people's perspectives. A lot of people would say, baby, you need to eat slower. Maybe you need to eat more whole foods. So I got off a lot of processed shit, and I started eating a lot more whole foods, just your rice, veggies, and meat. Pretty much the main things that I eat anyway in my diet. Even then, when I started to eat more whole foods, my food still doesn't digest as fast as I'd perceive as normal. Still finding myself feeling my food coming back up a lot of the time, or just struggle, feeling that, discomfort in my chest and my stomach. So then I started to think to myself, well, let's try fasting, right? So I started fasting. I used to fast a lot more often. Well, actually, I don't even know. It's kind of a gray area. Now, also, before I get into this as well, not saying that this is for everyone, but at the same time, just take what resonates, leave what doesn't. This may be beneficial for you. It may not be beneficial for you. This is just my own experiences. So this is just something that I've come to the conclusion of for myself. But if this doesn't apply to you, it doesn't apply to you. So, fasting helped me a lot, actually. If anything, I notice when I'm fasting and when I'm not eating, or when I'm just keeping liquids, a lot of the time I just have liquids, and not even liquid fruits or anything like that, which I'm going to start actually trying to do. But at the moment, it's just your teas, your coffee. I find myself a lot more energized. I find myself feeling a lot more light and a lot more healthy when I'm doing that, as opposed to when I eat. Let's say if when I used to eat breakfast, I'll find myself being a lot more lethargic during the day. I wouldn't get as much done. And nowadays, I even skip lunch. I've even started skipping lunch because I'm finding myself not really liking that either, because my body is not necessarily accepting it. So I'm starting to notice as my body gets lighter and lighter in weight, or my mind gets lighter and lighter in weight, right? Because what I talk about in my videos, right? I'm always talking about lightening your load, mentally speaking, letting go of shit, jumping out of forms. And as well, this ties into the topic of the video, because when we're constantly eating, like, this is a form of animalistic energy in itself. You know what I mean? This is why a lot of people struggle with addiction to food. Actually, a lot of the main addictions people struggle with stems from their addiction from food to food. So when I started to separate from a lot of my addictions to foods, I started to notice my addictions to other things started to dissipate too. So, my addiction to pleasure in general started to dissipate. And then I started to not care about those things as much because I wasn't attached to that shit. And so all of that stuff comes under animalistic energy, whether you want to admit it or not. And this is why, as humans, we are still somewhat animalistic, because a lot of the time we still act in animalistic ways. We still have to consume things of the physical, right? We still have to, like, intake a lot of heavy things, right? Because our bodies are heavy, you know what I mean? And as opposed to if you're trying to lighten your load, a lot of the time your body might start to push you towards intaking a lot more lighter things. Like for me right now, it's liquids. In time, I might, who knows, I might lessen my ability to be able to consume a lot of liquids. And then a lot of people will say, oh, well, that's unhealthy, blah, blah, blah. I could give a shit about what people think is healthy or not. Because at the end of the day, I know I live every single day. I can feel myself. I can feel my energy levels. I can feel my mental energy, all of that. So I know what's healthy for myself. You know what I mean? So when it comes to, anybody else who has any input on what they think is healthy for me, you're not me. So I could give a shit what anybody else says. So this is also why I reckon probably one of the reasons on why a lot of the government or a lot of the health, like, what is it called? Health advisors or health people try to push, like, you need food for energy, you need blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, when you are in need, this is a form of you relying on something external, and that's not being independent, and that's not necessarily even like something that you want to be in all the time. It's good to need and be needed sometimes, but when you're constantly in need, where a lot of people in this world are, when they need food, they need water, they need socialization, they need this, they need that, like, you're constantly relying on something else external. And when you rely on something, you're feeding on something, whether it's physical or mental. You know what I mean? So this is why a lot of people as well in the physical will play out vampiric energies. And, a lot of people will say, a lot of humans try to play out like a parasite, because you're still in your animalistic energy. So of course you're going to play out like a parasite if you're constantly consuming, whether it's physical or non-physical. But you can't help it anyway, because everything's internal and external, expansion, contraction, you know what I mean? So in some way, shape or form, you're going to be consuming and externalizing something, you know what I mean? But when you're really deep into that shit, when you're really low and heavy into that shit, of course, that's going to play out in a more low and heavy way, aka like vampirism or parasitic type of energies. And so this is why a lot of people stuck into their animalistic urges. And this is why I reckon a lot of the time the government tries to push shit like that, because they want everyone to stay in their base chakras, their lower chakras, from their root up to their solar plexus, so that people are operating in more of an animalistic energy, right? And in their desire, in their sexual energies, and in their ability to will things into reality, right? So all of this stuff is how they keep everyone in that base chakra. So this is why a lot of the world that we're in is based off of, how you can meet your desires, how you can get your desires met, how you can um, how you can will things into reality through your sexual energies or your creative energies, you know what I mean? Or how you can like express yourself, or be in the spotlight of something with your solar plexus energy. So all of that stuff, they try to keep us in that animalistic energy by like many different techniques. But I'd argue as well that one of the main things that they do as well is by really pushing that whole, yeah, let's eat, and like the whole concept of you need to eat 3 times a day and blah, blah, blah. When actually, like I say in my other videos, nothing is a one size fits all. Nothing is a one size fits all. So if me myself, back in the day when I used to continue to force myself to eat 3 times a day, I struggled a lot, and I was a lot more in my animalistic energies. As I started to, develop my own way of going about things, skipping breakfast, and now skipping lunch, and now even like a lot of the times I'm even considering skipping dinner. And even in the past when I've done it, when I've fasted, and I've fasted for I think the longest fast I've done is probably about 4 or 5 days of fasting. And I actually felt amazing. And so what I'm starting to notice is a lot of the time people are just reliant on something, like whether it's food or otherwise, you're just reliant on something, you're actually addicted to it without actually realizing, and your body's become accustomed. So that's why I say this might not be for everyone. If you've become accustomed to this lifestyle and that's the way your body is, I'm not going to sit here and tell you to force yourself to start fasting, you know what I mean? But if you feel drawn to that, if you feel like that's the right thing for you to do, if you feel like that might help you, definitely by all means, I would encourage you to do so. But a lot of people are still in that animalistic energy, and so a lot of people wouldn't be able to handle that. You know what I mean? A lot of people will feel depleted. A lot of people will feel drained. A lot of people will feel heavy. For me, a lot of the time, I feel heavier and I feel a lot more depleted the more I eat, the more I consume. You know what I mean? Now I'm able to just kind of focus more on liquids. It's a lot more better for me. But even liquids, I started to notice my body start lessening on its liquid intake as well. I used to drink so much water. Nowadays, I don't find myself actually needing water as much, unless I start drinking coffee, because coffee actually drains your fluids in your body, so then my body wants to replenish through that. But yeah, it's just ways of looking at things, so you can start to understand and look at your own way of how you can develop your own system of intake and moderation, because not everybody is going to be the same. For you, it may benefit you to fast maybe once a week. For me, I notice myself now, even though I'm not necessarily fasting all the time, but I'm not actually eating for the majority of the day. And I find myself feeling a lot more energized, feeling a lot more alive, feeling a lot more healthy because of that. So yeah, other examples as well, because I know a lot of people, when I started fasting, a lot of people think that when you get really, really hungry, right? This is something I noticed. I could be wrong, but this is something that I noticed. When people start to feel oh, I'm so hungry, I'm starving, think about what you're actually in, the energy that you're actually in, bar the food, you know what I mean? Because in your mind, a lot of people will get into that bias of, well, we need food to survive, right? But if you really think about the energy that you're in, think about how you're acting, you're craving something, you're pining for something so bad. You're feeling oh my gosh, I need this, right? That's literally the energy of what an addict is like. So when it comes to at least the way I see it, when you fall into that energy of I'm so starving, I'm so hungry, that's you having withdrawals. Your body's actually withdrawing from food right then. And that's something I noticed when I started fasting, because a lot of those really strong hunger pains or cravings for food actually went away, and I don't actually feel that a lot of the time. It's very rare that I'll find myself like, I'm so hungry, or really like pining. If anything, like that was more when I was eating more regularly. So my body was addicted to it in a way. My body was constantly like craving that to consume things, all right? So that's just some food for thought, in terms of that area. Something that I noticed from fasting and not fasting is that, a lot of that is just cravings. You're craving something. That's actually one of the ways on how I even quit smoking. Because when I used to smoke tobacco, I found myself struggling to like wean off it or get off it. It wasn't until I realized the connection between my addiction to food and my addiction to tobacco. And I started to use my addiction to food to replace that. So every time I would want a cigarette, I started to like, I would go outside, I'll have a cup of tea and I'll get a biscuit or something like that. Have a biscuit and a cup of tea. So my mind started to realize the association. And then I was within like a few months, I quit tobacco. So, a lot of that shit ties into your addiction to food, even down to consuming like media and stuff like that. A lot of that ties into people's addiction to food as well. So, how are you going to expect to be able to clear yourself or rid yourself of an addiction when you're constantly feeding into another addiction that you have as well? Because you're still feeding that addictive energy in general, whether it's food or whether it's entertainment or whether it's drugs, whatever it is, you're constantly in that consuming state. So that's why I would encourage anyone to at least try fasting, because you actually realize how a lot of the things that you do is more of like it's more of a want rather than an actual need. And a lot of people will get those two confused. And even in some ways and shapes, like your needs are not necessarily even healthy. Because a lot of people will be like, oh, well, yeah, like needs are good and wants are bad. Like a lot of people will associate those things, like, because wants is something that you can go without, right? I argue that a lot of needs that people would attribute as needs, you can probably go without a lot of those. But still, we're in heavy bodies and we're in like, animalistic bodies in general. So we still have needs and wants in general. So that's not to say, oh, you should just stop eating at all. Because a lot of people might hear that and be like, oh, well, I should just stop eating completely. It's like, no, you're probably gonna fucking die. You know what I mean? Because remember what body you're in. You know what I mean? So, but just keeping things into perspective and like developing more healthier habits for your mentality and for your physical. Because I'm trying to become lighter, I don't want to stay stuck in these heavy ass animalistic type bodies. So I'm starting to develop more habits that would attribute myself to a more lighter energy, like lessening my food intake. But then, like, keeping in mind as well, this is not a lot of this isn't like necessarily my choice. This is just the way that, like, I've started to realize as time goes on, and especially seeing Dollar to Pilot Man, because he even posted a video about him starting to become a crystal being, right? And it started to put things into perspective for me, because I'd been struggling with digestion and food intake and stuff. So I started to realize, like, instead of fighting it, I started to kind of lean into it. Okay, well, what is this telling me? Why am I struggling? So that's how I look at things now. I look at, even if I'm going through a negative circumstance, I'm like, okay, well, what is the purpose? Because there's obviously a meaning to why I'm experiencing this. So I've started to come to the conclusion of what he was talking about in his video about him becoming a crystal being, because he was talking about, like I was talking in this video, being lighter and your body not accepting those heavier things, right? And so I started to test those things out. This is why you've even got people in the world who are, what do they call them? Breatharians, or people who just like consume energy through the breath and through the sun and all that kind of stuff. And then they'll just eat every now and then, So it's always important to like develop your own way of doing things. Like look at your own system, your own regimen, what works for you. Because you can go to a doctor, but they're only going to go by what they think is right. So they might tell you, oh, you need to eat more, and you need to do this, and you need to do that. But it may not necessarily be the case. Like me, with how I was talking about, me trying many different things, trying whole foods, trying to like separate my liquids and my solid intake. Because a lot of people will say, oh, well, if you just eat eat another time instead of drinking and eating at the same time, you could just drink at one time and then wait an hour and then eat. That didn't even help. I didn't even notice a difference. So I started like, and then many other different things that I've tried as well beyond that. But one of the main things that's only helped me is fasting. So yeah, those are ways that people keep you, and the government tries to keep us in those lower animalistic energies as well. Just by not only our like consumption, of foods, but also the consumption of media, and like trying to emphasize how much we need something or how much we should tend to our wants, and all of these things are forms of desires anyway. So all of these things are forms of animalistic energies, whether you want to admit it or not. They just try to keep you in that animalistic energy in general. And we're meant to be rising above all of our animalistic energy, instead of sinking into them and succumbing to them. And then that'll just lead you to becoming an animal again. And you're not an animal, you're a human, you're in that in-between stage. So you'll still have animalistic energies, but you also have your higher energies. You have your greater, more expanded energies. So that just shows you that you're in a transition stage, because you've got one and the other. So do you want to transition to an animal, or do you want to transition to something greater? And a lot of people would say, oh, animals are a lot better than humans. But the problem with humans is a lot of them are succumbing to their animalistic energies. So it doesn't tie in. And plus, if animals were better than humans, then an animal would be able to teach a human how to go fetch, how to go do this. So the fact that you can teach a dog how to do something and how to do tricks just shows you who's on a more expanded level. It's just when you fall victim to your animalistic energies, that's when you start to see, oh, actually animals are better than humans. But it's actually, no, you're just looking at an animal, and you're comparing an animal and an animal. Because that human that you're looking at and saying that's worse than an animal is actually just an animalistic human. You know what I mean? So it's just like backwards type shit. But that's as well another way that government tries to put people into that animalistic energy, by trying to, make people think that, like, as humans, that our animalistic energies are human-like. So it's like, no, those are animalistic energies. They're not human-like. Human is a completely different, or man in general is a completely different thing that we're growing into, that we're not actually man yet. We're still in that in-between stage. Like I was saying, we're still in that animalistic man, which is why it's a human, not just a man. Because a man is actually a light form. A woman is actually a light form. It's like a light body that we can inhabit, or we can create. So yeah, this whole world is like built off of just consumption, people fulfilling their desires, people fulfilling their wants, and falling victim to their animalistic energies. So when you rise above all that shit, you start to realize. But a lot of the time, the government tries to make you think you're rising above that by giving us like stuff like money and luxuries and stuff like that, which just feeds more into your animalistic energies and feeds more into your desire. So it's like they got everyone living backwards, thinking that they're rising above something, or getting out of something, or ascending something, but you're actually going deeper into something by feeding more into that. So when you're like, oh, you're rich and you constantly don't know how to stop consuming, and you're constantly feeding your needs and your wants, Like you think that you're like above something because you're rich and you have a lot of money and you know how to just get anything you want at an instant. But it's like, no, you literally fell like into something because you're constantly feeding something that's lower, you know what I mean? As opposed to when you just rise above all of that and you realize you don't actually need or want like anything. The only reason you need or want something is because you're in a physical body that's more animal-like. So it's a weird ass freaking world that the shadow governments put people in, you know, where they just like see things completely backwards. So then you think that, like I was saying, with all the luxuries and blah blah blah, it's crazy ass shit, crazy. But yeah, it's fucked up. It's fucked up. But yeah, as long as you know what's going on and you're aware of it, then you can develop a more better way of going about it, and you don't have to fall victim to their little tricks that they try to get everyone to pull them down into hell because they're in a hellistic state. So they try to pull everyone down into a hellistic state with them. It's like misery loves company, you know. I don't want to be with misery, you know. I would rather have company with like something else, more angelic, more greater, more closer to all possibilities, more closer to truth. You know, because all possibilities is more independent. You know what I mean? It's more of an individual energy, which is not even individual because all possibilities is more expanded. But yeah, when it comes to that kind of stuff, you fall more victim into that animalistic energy. You know, that's more reliant. You know, animals have to rely on something else. Animals have to feed on something else. This is why as well, when you come out of the womb, you're like feeding on your mother's nutrients through the breasts. And even when you're in the womb, you're having to feed on someone else, your mother's nutrients through the umbilical cord. It's all a form of like a vampiric energy where you have to feed on something else in order to sustain yourself. So, and not to say like that it's right or wrong, but you know, if you want to rise above something, if you want to expand out of something, you shouldn't necessarily be going deeper into it by feeding more into it, if that makes sense. You should be like expanding out of it, growing out of it, separating yourself from it. So this is why separation is tied to more of lightness, you know, being light, being more free, and then connection is tied to more of being heavy, you know, and being more like entrapped. So not necessarily saying that one is better than the other, because you need both of them. You know, if you want to manifest and create something, you need to connect to it. You need to entrap it. You know, but if you also want to like grow, and if you want to get out of something and if you want to feel more free, you need to separate from it. So this is why, like with the world of polarity that we're in, you need to like utilize both things. So it's all about like a jump rope. Everything's like a jump rope kind of energy. So then you'll be able to be in true equilibrium and have true moderation, rather than falling victim to always wanting, always needing, always craving, always being in desire, always being in like shit. So yeah, I think I'll leave it at that. This was meant to be a short video and it ended up doing 53 minutes. So give ourselves a little pat on the back. And I'll see you guys for the next video, guys. Peace. My star out.